The latest and most official Google device is here, but we've only had it for a few days total. While we are able to draw a few conclusions about this device by now, we want to continue testing it for a full review coming very soon. But for now, it's Joshua Vergara from Android Authority. What's going on, everybody? And this is our initial review of the Google Pixel XL. Google brings their own design sensibilities to the Android world in a phone that was built by them from the ground up. The results are, unfortunately, pretty polarizing. And we here at Android Authority are about as split as all of you are. Personally, I had become kind of accustomed to what the Nexus brought to the table. Some pretty bare-bones looking phones that had particular quirks that really differentiated them. There's one quirk on the Pixel, and that's a panel of glass on the top third of the backing. And while this does differentiate the Pixel from other phones, it also feels a little bit, let's say, safe, and it's also not all that flashy, and it just adds to what is overall an understated look. That said, the phone feels really sturdy and has a very significant heft to it, and the sides have a very aggressive chamfer that add texture to the sides. Now with the smooth metal backing, thankfully that chamfer will keep the phone from slipping around, even though it does quite a bit already. And there is a little bit more heft on the top and bottom portions of the device, making it feel taller than it probably should have been. That said, however, it still feels solid, and with one hand you will have to perform some gymnastics to really get around. Now, Google opted for AMOLED screens for the Pixel phones, and the smaller Pixel comes in at 1080p resolution. This one is a XL with 5.5 inches in the screen at Quad HD resolution, and everything looks pretty damn good on it. A lot of YouTube videos were viewed in the last few days, everything from animated shorts to daily vlogs, and they all look wonderful at 720p resolution and above. Now, this is the first phone to sport the Snapdragon 821, and it comes as no surprise that the Pixel XL performs beautifully. Consider also that this is pure Android, the streamlined and fully put together version by Google that is supposed to provide the pure experience. Now, that's not to say that other Android devices lack in the speed department. There just seems to be a great deal of attention to detail that Google put into this phone in terms of the user experience. Transitions all look so smooth, and going around all the elements is just a breeze. And it feels like this is definitely the poster child for what Android should feel like. We will be playing with more games and performing more tasks in the coming days, especially with multitasking features, but so far the Pixel XL is a good poster child for the Snapdragon 821. Now, hardware might actually be a bit of a sore point for the Google Pixel phones, mostly because of storage. Now, you're already paying a hefty price for these phones, and if you want 128 gigabytes for either of them, you're going to pay even more. Now, in this case, I have a 32 gigabyte device, and with Final Fantasy games installed on here, I only had half of that available for all the 4K recording I wanted to do. Now, it is true that Pixel owners will be able to upload at full resolution all photos and videos, but having to find Wi-Fi and then allow the Google Photos app to clean up the camera folder, these are steps that I just am not used to just yet. Sound is a welcome highlight for the Pixel, a phone that is supposed to take voice inputs at any time, and as long as it's near enough to hear my voice, it will pick it up, and I can do any query or question for the Google Assistant pretty easily. So to that end, this bottom-mounted speaker, which obviously won't be as good as, let's say, dual front-facing speakers, actually does a really good job. It just might be the best one of its kind. And like I said, it does a really good job of having you hear the Google Assistant clearly. For example, "Okay, Google, how are you doing today?"
"I've had a great day. I was just looking up some fun things to do."
A 3450 mAh battery in here actually does a pretty average to above average job so far. I've only had it for a few days, but I have done some pretty aggressive use over the last couple of days, in particular using GPS navigation, a lot of music playing, and of course using the Google Assistant. And to that end, I was able to get about 16 hours with 3.5 to 4 hours of screen on time, definitely making it to the end of the day, which brings me to an interesting change I noticed in my battery usage. Of course, screen on time is really important, but I found myself using audio more often simply because of the Google Assistant. After all, when using the Google Assistant, you can get what's called a daily briefing. Now, the daily briefing will have Google Assistant just say good morning to you, tell you the weather, any calendar entries you have, and then from there, it can move straight into a somewhat podcast-like player that plays a curated list of different news briefings from NPR or the Wall Street Journal. On any given morning so far in the last 3 to 4 days, I have been able to listen to NPR, Wall Street Journal, and tech news for about an hour to 2 hours. So if you end up using the Google Assistant, especially for features like that, you will see that metric show up in your battery stats. Which brings us to the cameras. Now, we have a rear-facing main camera with 12.3 megapixels at f2.0 aperture and a front-facing unit shooting 8 megapixels. Now, the cameras on here will look similar to that of the Nexus 6P, but there are a few key enhancements here. First of all, the Google camera looks very similar to what you would pretty much expect from the Nexus from before, and it has all of the different features you would expect. Panorama, along with photosphere, lens blur, and slow motion of 120 frames per second if at 1080p resolution. HDR is now HDR+, a version of it that is actually pretty much always on. If you have HDR+ on auto, it will attempt to add some of those enhancements in pretty much every photo that you take. And to that end, HDR+ does a pretty good job of adding vibrance to the color while bringing down the highlights in particularly blown out areas. Which brings us to the main feature of the Pixel XL that I at least am really excited for, video stabilization. Essentially, there's no optical image stabilization on this camera, and it uses a software-based stabilization that uses information from the gyroscope. And you'll be able to see the change from stabilization off to stabilization on. Now, one of the best parts about this is that the video stabilization can be used when recording in 4K, which is not that common when it comes to Android devices. The best part is that there's a lack of a jello effect that you would usually get with other software-based stabilizations. And even if the movements feel a little bit robotic, they are much better than the alternative. Overall, the camera has already been very impressive, and I would say even at this early outset that it's better than most shooters out there. We will continue to do testing and comparisons with other Android devices so we can really see where the Pixel stands among the rest. Now, unfortunately, it is unclear whether this version of Android will make it to other non-Google branded devices, and that might be a shame because 7.1 is a delight to use, mostly due to the Google Assistant. And if you've never used it before, you should definitely check out Google Allo and see if you enjoy it. If you do, imagine having that functionality baked into the very core of your smartphone. Now, we will score this phone on its own merits, but I have to bring you a thought I've had plenty of times over the last 3 to 4 days. If the rest of Android didn't exist, this phone would be one of the best things to ever come out. Unfortunately, the rest of the Android world does exist, and there are plenty of devices out there that provide more for much lower price points. But the other thought that keeps nagging at me is that the Pixel so far seems to have damn near perfected the basics of an Android device, something that plenty of other Android phones have inexplicably faltered at. As always, thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this initial review of the Google Pixel XL. This is our first review of this, mostly because we only had a short time with it thus far, and we wanted to do further testing on it to make sure that our conclusions definitely hold weight. We will also do some comparisons, so you might see some of those in our full review, and you might get some second opinions, because I'm not the only one here at AA that has one of these phones. Stay tuned for that and even more about the Google Pixel line of phones, including this XL in my hand right here, and you can stay tuned here by subscribing to our channel if you haven't already, and remember to drop us some likes on these videos because we love to see those thumbs up. From there, stick around for even more about this and beyond in the world of Android, because we are, of course, your source for all things Android.